Here's the bathtub, the wonderful bathtub that protected Lower Manhattan from being flooded. Now, how the foundation was made for the towers, they poured concrete on the bedrock. So wouldn't that concrete be busted up if the rest of the concrete in the building busted up? Some questions to ask. The sound, I don't think is going to.
Yes.
Forgot about that. There's a sound feed?
I mean, obviously, we've looked at all of the seismic signals. The main focus of that was to establish the timing of the various events, and if any, again, using it also to see if there were any events that we could not explain other than it being the collapse of the towers and the World Trade Center 7. The signal strength due to the collapse of the towers were not of any magnitude that was seismically significant from an earthquake design standpoint, or from the design or failure of a structural component, or of, I would say, a piping system that might be used in a structure. So there wasn't anything that gave us pause in terms of that being a significant seismic event.
This is Shyam Sundar of NIST telling us at this meeting in this past December that there was no significant seismic impact on the ground when the towers went away that could cause damage to surrounding structures. That was an amazing thing for him to have said. So no wonder why the bathtub wasn't disturbed. The bathtub did get damaged later. When they brought in those mega cranes, that's when the damage began to occur. So these various earth-moving equipment cranes that they brought in caused more damage than 2 500,000-ton buildings landing on them. And I think you're familiar with the design of the Trade Center, and I think you saw this picture earlier, that the footprint of each of the towers is here, and the base is still there. It wasn't shattered. The foundation built on bedrock is still there. And the PATH train tunnels did not get damaged. Yes, there was some water in them, but with all those fire hoses, the water had to go somewhere. And once they pumped it out, it stayed dry. And one of my favorite pictures is Roadrunner. He survived. He survives anything. He survived a 500,000-ton building falling on him without a scratch. And he's now living at that hangar, was it 17 at JFK? But these are from the Warner Brothers store, and they've saved these things. So how do you get a building of that size falling down and the first sub-basement isn't damaged? Dust. Lots of dust. That's how it happens. This part of the building doesn't make a thud when it hits. Fruit with dust on it. Dust everywhere. Now, if we look at the 95th story there, up here, you can see this mechanical floor down here, and at that elevation, and that is approximately where Tower 2 was, quote, hit, where it got its hole. So this top pile driver, they tried to make it seem, looks like it just disintegrated before floor 78 began to move downward. Again, here's floor 78. This piece here rotates over and then disappears. And then the rest continues down. We're going to notice things like this piece here. I call them wheat checks, those outer column segments, groups. They were turning to dust midair, but the aluminum cladding that goes over them did not, which is a little bit peculiar. And again, a very large section of wheat checks falling through the air, and I don't even believe it hit the ground. We didn't hear of anybody, getting stuff landing on top of them. There were a few odds and ends that went across the street and whatnot, but not 110 stories worth of outer columns. Again, looking at Tower 2, the snowball, why isn't there any more debris lower than this? It looks like the demolition wave was ahead of free fall of gravity. This is a 40-story building. This used to be 110. Where did it go? It looks like not much of it landed on the ground either. It looks like it went in a blender and got stirred up. But there was a lot of dust everywhere, very fine powder. In the second portion of my talk, we're going to evaluate the dust very carefully. This is a once-over of the general observations that we see at the scene. Look at this dust around their feet. Dust everywhere, very fine dust, and it's all the same size, approximately. If you threw a brick off of the roof of a building and it landed on the pavement below, you'd have big pieces, small pieces, some powder in between size pieces, a wide range. You wouldn't have all the same size powder.
And what was that size?
Very small. I have not evaluated it myself, but I've seen photographs of it, and you can't discern the dust samples. I've seen reports, we'll talk about that in the second portion, because there's a lot of questions about the dust studies they've presented to us. But this to me doesn't look like a collapse. This looks like a drinking fountain made out of dust. And then there's the famous spire we've heard about. That corner of the core columns that disappeared before our eyes. It just turned to dust. Here's stages of it. A little video clip of it. And you see a bunch of dust sitting on the various levels there. Individual photographs in sequence here show first this freestanding bunch of core columns, and we know how tall Building 7 is, right here. 47 stories. So maybe these inner core columns that are freestanding, about 60 stories, would you say? 60 stories, and they're standing all by themselves. They're pretty strong and pretty rigid. They can't be very flexible. They can't be like spaghetti, because how would it be standing by itself? So that tells us that these columns are very stiff and strong at that moment. Notice how they move and just turn to dust. If they're that stiff and rigid, how is it going to go straight down and just, without rotating over even? It just turns to dust. And the dust rolls down the street. Lots of dust, like world's records of any demolition we've ever seen. But it's interesting, it only rolls out so far, and then it goes up, as though it has a stopwatch. It only is allowed to roll out for a distance, then it starts going upward. We're just looking at the data. We're not trying to fit it to any idea, just looking at the data. And after the towers go away, what is this dust here coming up from the streets? Dust going out across the water. Lots of dust. And notice the shadows. It blocks out the sunlight. Rolling down the streets. Now, when the Kingdom was taken down by conventional controlled demolition, the highest the dust went was about the height of the Kingdom. And in the Seattle Times it said, and it filled the air downtown, was filled for almost 20 minutes before it all settled out. How long did this take to settle out? This is a satellite image, and this appears to be going